Okay, guys, we are live. Good evening, everyone. Good to see you all, and good to welcome our listeners and watchers wherever you are in the world as we continue learning. This is part 5 of the guide for the perplexed, More, Nebukhin. We started 4 classes ago trying to dissect the words of the Rambam in this very, very monumental work of his, controversial work, we shall say. And maybe it's a good point to remind everybody that we're learning this. We are not teaching this, and I think that may be one of the big differences between what else you might find out there on YouTube or on shiurim online, where you might have some people that are teaching and kol hakavod to them. But we want to learn this together. That was the point of this chabura that we started, and as well, if anyone that's listening, to learn with us. And that's why we encourage, if you're listening and you're watching and you want to ask a question on a comment, please feel free to do so. And who knows, maybe one of us will answer, and or we can discuss it next time if it's something that's worth discussing the following class. But it's been great so far. Last class was really, really good, really enlightening with some great ideas and chidushim. Warren has the minhag to recap the previous class. I don't know if he's up for doing it again, but if not, we can just go into the introduction. But he's ready. He's got something.
Barely, yeah. Well, I was waiting. I just jotted a few notes.
Okay, let's go. Warren will give a little recap, and then we'll continue from where we left off.
So last time we learned that the Rambam taught us that there was 2 types of parables. There were many types, but he broke them up into 2 main types. One type is that every word has meaning behind it, and he gave a pasuk in the Torah to explain it. And then there are many parables that most of the words in the parable don't have to be dissected and looked into. The whole point is to look at what the parable means. And he gave a beautiful example of that one. I believe it was from Mishle. And the goal, very nice thing that he said, or interesting thing he said, what to learn from that parable that had a lot of words, and it was just the overall meaning that we were looking for. The gist of everything was, he said that the pursuit of bodily pleasures is the source of all sin and all evil. That was what that parable was trying to prove. But in itself, it's a very important lesson, because that explains really when people are doing something wrong. Ultimately, when you break it down, why they're doing it, and you keep breaking it down, it'll go to fulfill a bodily pleasure. He also mentioned last week, from what we learned last week, that we don't need to look into not every part of a midrash or a parable has meaning. So that's related to what I just mentioned. And the goal of the midrash, of learning a parable, midrashim included, is to know the point it's trying to make, even if it's just the main point. So it can be a very long midrash. As long as you know what the main point it's trying to make, that's the goal, according to the Rambam. Very interestingly, toward the end of what we learned last week, he said, he keeps repeating that this work that he did was for a select few, was not for the masses. So anybody that learns it should not be teaching it to others voluntarily, proactively. If someone asks and they want to learn about it, it's one thing, but not just to go around like we do with other pieces of Torah that we learn and we want to share it. He's really, really stresses that we should not be teaching it to others just to give them something interesting. And he ended up with saying that some of the concepts, a lot of the concepts are difficult, but even if 1 out of 10,000 understand what he's trying to teach, that was his goal of writing this whole book.
Okay. Hazak, Jimmy, anything to add to the recap?
Well, that was pretty much a good recap. Let's go. Let's get started.
Let's go. Okay, so we are on page number 17. We're actually what he calls the introduction, but we started with the introduction, so maybe the official introduction. Before this was the instruction. We hope to get that today and maybe even begin chapter 1. So we're on page 17 in the guide for the perplexed. We're using this book right here. Let's get into the camera. And even if you don't have a copy, you can listen to us as I read it. And again, feel free to comment, ask questions, and maybe we'll get to it. But let's start. He says in his introduction, one of 7 causes should account for the contradictory or contrary statements to be found in any book or compilation. The first cause, the author has collected the remarks of various people with differing opinions, but has omitted citing his authorities and has not attributed each remark to the one who said it. Contradictory or contrary statements can be found in such compilations because one of the 2 propositions is the opinion of one individual, while the other proposition is the opinion of another individual. Okay. The second cause, why there would be contradictory statements, the author of a particular book has adopted a certain opinion that he later rejects. Both his original and later statements are retained in the book. The third cause, not all the statements in question are to be taken in their external sense. Some are to be taken in their external sense, while some others are parables and hence have inner content. That's what he spoke about last week, where he says sometimes you just got to look deeper and sometimes you just take it for face value. Alternatively, 2 apparently contradictory propositions may both be parables and when taken in their external sense may contradict or be contrary to one another. The fourth cause, there's a proviso that because of a certain necessity has not been explicitly stated in its proper place. Or the 2 subjects may differ, but one of them has not been explained in its proper place, so that a contradiction appears to have been said, whereas there is no contradiction.
So let's 1 second. So the first 3 seem very straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
This 4th one, I want to see if we can clarify.
So I think this causes a lot of perplexity in people. I think this is why he's saying, we're going to try to break it out and to try to come up with the reasons behind the technical reasons of why this happens. But this happens quite often. I would say in more than half of the stuff that I read, there appears at least to be it appears to be contradictory.
Yeah, as opposed to, for example, when this happens in the Gemara, in the Talmud, usually it's because it's properly being clarified or elucidated later in the text. So that happens a lot. When you're learning Gemara, you go, wait, that's a contradiction. And it seems to be continuing without dealing with it, but then you catch it a few paragraphs later where they come back and they deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
So the Gemara is a good example of how this is used, but they use it properly. They clarify it. I think he's using here as an example where it's a mistake. In other words, where it creates contradiction when there's something that is contradicting but hasn't been clarified later, right? I think that's what he's. Oh no! So this is actually where, because of a certain necessity has not been. So in other words, he's describing the type of contradiction in the Gemara, right? Where it's necessary to wait and clarify the contradiction at a later time, right?
Yeah.
He's saying it's because of a certain necessity.
So the common mistake, I think that happens with a lot of people that begin to learn Gemara, but also happens, even people who've been learning it for decades. Where sometimes you're learning something and it doesn't make sense, and then we break our head trying to figure it out. Like this, and maybe it means this, whereas if you just can't figure out, you read a bit more and you have your answer. You'll have the answer there, basically, right? So sometimes you just need to do that. It doesn't make sense. You just got to continue and we'll find our answer. And usually you do.
Okay.
The fifth cause arises from the necessity of teaching and making someone understand. For there may be a certain obscure matter that is difficult to conceive. One has to mention it or take it as a premise in explaining something that is easy to conceive, and that by rights ought to be taught before the former, since one always begins with what is easier. I'm going to finish this paragraph to see if I understand what he's trying to say, because I still don't really understand what he's saying. The teacher accordingly will have to be lax, and using any means that occur to him or gross speculation will try to make that first matter somehow understood. He will not undertake to state the matter as it truly is in exact terms, but rather will leave it so in accord with the listener's imagination that the latter will understand only what he now wants him to understand. Afterwards, in the appropriate place, that obscure matter is stated in exact terms and explained as it truly is. Okay.
That's clear.
Yeah.
Okay, I get
Sometimes someone uses a wrong example.
Yeah, but I just didn't know where the contradiction was here.
No, so I see it more in a situation where you're gonna explain a complex concept, but you want to get there. You have to, so you start with the simple, and then you at some point in the future you will get into the deeper part. Whereas somebody that probably already knows or has a foundation or something may say, wait a second, but there's more, and there's a contradiction to this, but the writer chose to do it this way so that the person that will understand the easy part first, then there will be other things to consider before the more complicated part of the same message is brought out, right? So until that happens, it appears to be contradictory, right? Until it's elucidated in the future.
Actually,
it makes sense to me.
Because all of these, from what I'm understanding, he's pointing out issues. The issues that happen when someone tries to explain something. And I think sometimes we try, like Jimmy said, sometimes we try to simplify something because it's too difficult. Like if you're in grade 3 and you're trying to explain a difficult concept, you can't explain it as like a deep face value. You're going to lose the crowd. So, I think he's pointing out that sometimes someone tries to explain it in an easier way, but the easier way that he's using is not good. There's contradictions in that explanation. He could have used a better example, or he could have said it in a different way, and because he didn't, it's causing confusion.
Sure.
It's causing confusion to the audience, and they're not getting it. They're not understanding it.
Sure. Rabbi, what grade do you teach?
Usually middle school, but mostly grade 8.
So they're 13 years old, 12 years old, 14 years old. So you must be faced with this a lot, where there's a complicated topic. Some of the boys are going to get it. Some of the boys will get it better than others, and some won't get it. Right? So you have to pace how you teach it. So what's going to happen is you're going to come up with the simple part of the message, right? And then you're going to leave out the more complicated part and continue until you're ready to give the more complicated. Whereas the 3 or 4 kids that are fast, right, they're already thinking there's a contradiction here, right? Like, wait a second, there's more to this. But there's got to be more, right? But then it all ties in at the end when you try. I think that's what he's trying to say here, right? It's the way you convey a message depending on the level. I find that you have that challenge, Rabbi, when you give your speeches on Shabbat, because a lot of times, sometimes you have a very deep or complex Dvar Torah, right? And the people that are in the sanctuary are of very different backgrounds. So for example, you start off with a very simple message, right? And then little by little you build up, because if you go right away to the part that's very complicated, you lose the other ones that are not there yet. I find that that's a very big challenge that you must have when you do the Dvar Torah of Shabbat. No,
it's every pulpit rabbi has that challenge, knowing his crowd and how to deliver an idea. Right? There's, I'm thankful that our kahal, I think, is a very educational, and intellectual crowd, and I feel that only feels like for me, it's my challenge is to up it. I'm not, like, again, I don't go into any speech and deliver a speech if it's not a chidush somewhat to at least to me. There's got to be something to me that stands out, that I know if it's standing out to me, then it's probably going to stand out to somebody else as well. Now, there could be somebody in the crowd that might feel, okay, that was just boring and I didn't get anything from it, and that's fine. Like, there's not every Divrei Torah is going to be appealing to every person, but the manner to deliver it, and in using stories and hooks and parables and to try to get the message across. And yes, sometimes that includes musar and tochacha and rebuke and whatever it is. Then, so be it. But I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying, and that is certainly a challenge for every rabbi and teacher, and even parents. Even parents, you want to teach your kids a lesson. You're not going to start quoting theories in psychology books that you learn in university about why something is worth pursuing or not worth pursuing. You got to give them things that they'd understand. But yeah.
One thing that I find, I don't know if he covered it already in the 5 or is going to cover it in the 6 and 7, that I find very often when I'm reading the Torah, a book, usually it's a book, and a point is trying to be proven. They're trying to prove a point, and in proving the point, the premise that they're using, the arguments, the examples that they're using, they're flawed. Like you're reading it and you're saying, no, it doesn't, because like they're making it fit. I don't know how to explain it. They're making it fit to prove their point. So I think that's part of what the rabbi is explaining here. But my big question, as we're just working through these 7 causes, is why is he bringing this up? In the first place, he starts this introduction with one simple sentence that says, one of 7 causes should account for the contradictory or contrary statements to be found in any book or conversation.
Yeah, I was. Why are we even talking about this?
Yeah, why is he bringing this up? Like, what he's saying is all right so far, it makes sense, but why would he bring this up in his introduction? Remember, this is the introduction. Finally, this is the 3rd introduction, but the introduction to the chapter, which is going to deal with terms, similes, and those types of things. Jimmy, why do you think he's even bringing it up?
So I think maybe he's preparing people to. I think what I think is he's listing the various reasons why a person can learn a sefer and think, nah, this sefer is no good. There's too many contradictions, and then he's saying, beware, because there are sefers or books that will have contradictions for not the right reasons, like the ones that don't cite and so on. But there are contradictions in Sefarim that you have to wait for it. There's a reason for them. And he's preparing all of us for the fact that we are going to witness many contradictions in the Mora Nivukhin when we start reading. That's what I think he's doing.
Interesting. So you think he's protecting himself before he starts?
I think so. And he's also making a distinction between the fact that there are people that I don't think he supports the fact that there are people that will write sefarim and write opinions without citations, because that creates contradiction. And he's very careful in everything he does. Mishneh Torah, and he cites. He's brilliant, right? So,
do you think he's also trying to? That's a beautiful point. But do you think he's also trying to make the point that a lot of what you're learning is, I hate to say it, it's a bad thing to say. There's flaws in it that's going to confuse you. There are flaws. No, you don't think he's trying to say that?
No, on the contrary, I think he's.
The Rambam was elitist, right? It was very.
Yeah, no, but I think it's interesting you're saying that. I think he's doing the opposite. I think he's saying, don't think that if you read something here and it's contradictory to you, that it's not perfect. That's what he's saying, that whatever he's going to write is perfect. Right. And that's what I think he's.
Or he's going to bring various terms that could have different meanings, right? And those meanings can be perceived as contradictory, but based on these rules, maybe they're not. Like I think that's more than that what you said. That's going to start chapter 1, right? Yeah, could be. That's
interesting.
Yeah. Okay. He's laying the groundwork again. He's continuing to lay the groundwork. And pretty much really what he's been saying till now in the introduction is this is not going to be easy stuff. And this is not just picking up a novel and reading, right? There's going to be struggle. There's going to be challenge. But don't worry because I've got your back. That's what he's trying to say, right? Because you're correct, Warren. One thing about Rambam, he was, it's so many qualities, but he did have an elitist sort of mentality when it came to teaching and learning. Even the way he starts the book, he says, I wouldn't have taught you this if I didn't think you were really bright. To his student. At the beginning, I wasn't sure if you could, but then when I learned with you, I saw you, and he's pretty much saying, I'm only interested in people that can grasp this to read, right? Which, by the way, I think is an interesting marketing tool, because everybody thinks they're smart, right? So he's pretty much telling everybody, don't touch this unless you're smart. So he's pretty much telling everybody, read it, right? In my opinion. It's challenging everyone to read it. Maybe in today's generation, back then, people were humble and didn't think they were smart. or unless you were really learning all day. But I think that's got to be one of the biggest marketing tools is, don't read this book. This is very hard. This is very challenging. Well, what does that make? Everybody in my kids' yeshiva wants to read this book and Derech Hashem because they're told not to, right? So it's just, I think it's an interesting way of how he's setting up the stage.
Yeah. Okay, let's go on. The sixth cause. The contradiction is concealed and becomes evident only after many premises. The greater the number of premises needed to make the contradiction evident, the more concealed it is. It thus may escape the author who thinks there is no contradiction between his two original propositions. But if each proposition is considered separately, a true premise being joined to it and the necessary conclusion drawn, and this is done to every conclusion, a true premise being joined to it and the necessary conclusion drawn. Oh, did I do that twice? No.
Yeah, it's written twice.
It's written twice.
Typo, yeah.
After many, okay, Jimmy, help me with that word. Syllogisms? Syllogisms?
You went too fast for me.
No, because they wrote it seems like they wrote the same sentence twice.
Yeah.
But if each proposition is considered separately, a true premise being joined to it and the necessary conclusion drawn.
Yeah, and this is done to every conclusion. Continue.
A true premise being joined to it and necessary conclusion drawn. Okay. After many syllogisms,
good.
The outcome of the matter will be that the two final conclusions are contradictory or contrary to each other.
All right. So
I think that's what I was speaking about when I read some stuff. The premises that they use to prove one another, it doesn't make sense. Like it doesn't add. It doesn't add up.
But I got to ask you guys: do you feel that's a typo?
No, there's a typo because he repeats it twice. Word for word. Yeah.
Yes, you think it's a typo then?
Yeah.
Well, the second way we read it didn't sound like a typo.
That's what I'm saying. It may not be a typo. I find it hard to believe that at this many additions there would be a typo here.
But if each preposition is considered separately, a true premise being joined to it, and the necessary conclusion drawn to it, and that is done to every conclusion. A true premise being joined to it, and necessary conclusion drawn.
It's not a typo.
And he just repeats it.
He's repeating it for emphasis.
Right.
That is the kind of thing that escapes the attention of scholars who write books. If, however, two original propositions are evidently contradictory, but the author has simply forgotten the first one, writing down the second other part of his compilation, this is a very great weakness, and that man should not be reckoned among those whose speeches deserve consideration.
After reading the 6-1, Jimmy, I think it's the elitist. After reading this one, let's see.
And you should know how many. You know how many people have written books and essays deciphering contradictory remarks from the Rambam, right? The things that he said in Mishneh Torah versus what he said in his Perush of the Mishnayot, okay, which imply two different things, especially when it comes to halacha. Not so much philosophical stuff, but when it comes to philosophy too, like here versus the beginning of Mishneh Torah. But and there's people defending the Rambam, books on the defense of the Rambam.
Well, he says it himself. I don't know if it's in Mishneh Torah in the introduction or you read it here, maybe in the. He says it himself. He's not afraid to say that he changes his tune when he has to change it. Some people, and that's very good. It's actually very good, and it's rare because a lot of people, most humans don't. They believe one way, and because they can't admit that they did something wrong, they will just continue with it. No matter what, even if someone proves it to them, if they see something differently that makes their original opinion invalid, they won't admit it. But very few people do, and he admits it. I've read it in one of his works where he said, now the Mora Nebukhin was written, I think it was his last great work, correct? It was his last great one. Mm-hmm. That's when he was older. Actually, in the book, you know where I read this? I didn't read this in the introduction. I have a very good book that I brought on the Rambam that explains his life, his whole life. And of course, within that book, it talks about how he wrote these great masterpieces. It's in that book that I read, now I'm remembering, where he admits, by the time he got to Mora Nebukhin, a lot of what he thought before was wrong. He's trying to make it right. He's wiser now. He's wiser, and he's coming, he's correcting himself.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. The seventh cause. In speaking about very obscure matters, it is necessary to conceal some parts and to disclose others. Sometimes, in the case of certain dicta, this necessity requires that the discussion proceed on the basis of a certain premise, whereas in another place, necessity requires that the discussion proceed on the basis of another premise contradicting the first one. In such cases, the vulgar must in no way be aware of the contradiction. The author accordingly uses some device to conceal it by all means.
It's a contradiction on purpose, is what he's saying.
Yeah.
And that only if you are not ignorant, or what does he call it? A vulgar. If you're not vulgar, then you'll be able to see through the contradiction.
Yeah.
And, I don't want to make light of this, but I promise you, after reading this, first time I read the Mora Nebukhin, I didn't really grasp or understand much of it, so I kept thinking I was the vulgar, right? Because I'm thinking, I'm not seeing through these contradictions, right? Maybe I'm the vulgar, because the truth is, there's so many things where he says things, some things are clear, there's many things that are not clear. Purposely, that's right. And it's interesting how as you get older and you go through more life and you learn more, you understand a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And but yeah, the first time I read it, I said I must be the vulgar. You have someone behind you, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Oh, that reminds me of a famous news reporter that was on. The nanny came in with the.
Nanny comes with the baby. Yeah.
That's a classic. Anyway, good. All right.
Okay, so now the contradictions that are to be found in the Mishnah and the Baraita are due to the first cause. Okay, the first cause. We said there's differing opinions. He's collected, but omitted citing the authorities. As well, really, the Bright and the Mishnah are from the same level of Tanaim. Thus, you will find that they constantly ask, does not the beginning of the passage constitute an objection against its end? In such a case, in such cases, the answer is, the beginning is the opinion of a certain rabbi and the end of another rabbi. Right, so that's how the Gemara will say. No, the Reisha is like Rabbi Meir, the Seifa, Rabbi Shimon. Okay, and that's how you likewise will find that they say Rabbi Yehuda Nasi agreed with the opinion of a certain rabbi in this one, or in this matter, and therefore cited anonymously. In that other matter, he agreed with the opinion of that other rabbi, and therefore cited anonymously. You often will find them also saying, who is the author of this anonymous passage? Such and such rabbi. Who is the author of that passage in the Mishnah? Such and such rabbi. Such cases are innumerable. The contradictions or divergences to be found in the Talmud are due to the first cause and to the second. Thus, you find them constantly saying, in this matter he agreed with this rabbi, and in that with another rabbi. They likewise say, he agreed with him on one point and disagreed on another. They also say that two statements are made by two Amoraim who disagree as to the opinions of a certain rabbi. Which, again, all these things that he's saying are anyone that's learned Gemara comes across them all the time.
It's straight up.
Yeah. All contradictions of this kind are due to the first cause. Contradictions to the second cause are referred to when they say, Rav abandoned this opinion, Rabbah abandoned that opinion. In such cases, an inquiry is made as to which of the two statements is the later one. This is similar to their saying in the first recension? In the first recension of the Talmud by Rabbi Ashi, he said one thing, and in the second another one. That some passages in every prophetic book, when taken in their external sense, appear to contradict or to be contrary to one another is due to the third cause and to the fourth. Now he's saying, when you see a contradictory in Tanakh, the first two is Talmud. Now he's saying, you might find some passages in Tanakh that are contradictory. That's due to the third and the fourth. And it was with this in view that the entire introduction was written. You already know how often the sages, may their memory be blessed, say one verse says this and another verse says that. They straightway establish that there is an apparent contradiction. That's what they do in the Gemara. Thereupon they explain that a proviso, see, I'm correcting myself now, a proviso is lacking in the statement of the subject, or that two texts have different subjects. Thus they say, Solomon, is it not enough for you that your words contradict those of your father? They also contradict themselves, and so on. Cases of this are frequent in the sayings of the sages, may their memory be blessed. However, most of the prophetic statements they refer to concern commandments or precepts regarding conduct. We, on the other hand, propose to draw attention to verses that are apparently contradictory with regard to opinions and beliefs. Part of this will be explained in some of the chapters of this treatise, for this subject too belongs to the mysteries of the Torah. Whether contradictions due to the seventh cause are to be found in the books of the prophets is a matter for speculative study and investigation. Statements about this should not be a matter of conjecture. As for the divergences occurring in the books of the philosophers, or rather of those who know the truth, they are due to the fifth cause. On the other hand, the contradictions occurring in most of the books of authors and commentators, other than those we have mentioned, are due to the sixth cause.
And the sixth cause, that's where he sounded most elitist.
Yeah.
Remember?
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting that he attributes those to authors and commentators.
Likewise, in the Midrashim and the Agadah, I don't think he really means the Haggadah there. I think it's the Agadah. Agadah, yeah. There is to be found great contradiction due to this cause. That is why the sages have said no question should be asked about difficulties in the Agadah. There are also to be found therein contradictions to the seventh cause. Divergences that are to be found in this treatise are due to the fifth cause and the seventh. Know this, grasp its true meaning, and remember it very well, so as not to become perplexed by some of its chapters. So he's telling you that this book, the fifth and seventh. For the fifth one is when the teacher breaks down things simple.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Yep. It's interesting. I thought he was criticizing the first cause.
It sounds like he is.
Right?
He's for sure critical. The sixth cause is for sure a critique.
Of the author not citing, right? Contrary statements can be found because one of the two propositions is in the opinion of one, while the other proposition is the opinion of the other one. But by not citing, you might think it's contradicting because you'd think it's one person giving the opinion of two contradictory terms. But because the author, in a way, I still think he's showing that there's a weakness in the first cause. You know, am I seeing it wrong?
He's not being straight when he explains it, like when he is this part that we're learning. So it's hard to tell. He's not being openly critical.
No,
he seems to be most critical of the authors and the commentators, which are linked to the sixth cause. And then he's covering what you said earlier, Jenny, when I asked the question. Why is he telling us all this? Well, he's covering himself with the fifth and seventh.
Yeah.
The fifth is pretty straightforward. Like Rabbi mentioned, it's someone can't explain a difficult concept in an easier way. So I think the Rambam is saying, be a little forgiving if I don't use the best simple example, and you think that number one. And then the seventh one, it's the first line. When he's speaking about very obscure matters, it is necessary to conceal some parts and disclose others. That makes sense, because that's the whole book. That's what you were saying as well. Sometimes when he explains something, but he doesn't explain the whole thing.
Right.
He's not going to give you everything, and we're going to see he's going to use the terms very often. And if you understand if you get it, you get it. There's no point in. I don't need to say anything else for the ones that get it. And he ends it there.
Yeah. I'm really excited because I'm seeing the finish line towards the chapter 1. No?
Yeah, almost there.
We're almost there.
And after these introductory remarks, I shall begin to mention the terms whose true meaning, as intended in every passage according to its context, must be indicated. So that's what it was all about. It was all about the terms and the phrases. This then will be a key permitting one to enter places, the gates to which were locked. When these gates are open and these places are entered into, the souls will find rest therein, the eyes will be delighted, and the bodies will be eased of their toil and of their labor. Le'avdil, that's like the teaser trailer you get in the,
Yeah.
For the movie that's about to begin.
That's right.
Or it's coming around.
Yeah.
Interesting. The souls will find rest therein. As if like the souls of people that struggle with contradictory remarks or inexplicable parables or things, it's to the learner, to the person who wants to to see. He's not at rest.
Yes.
He's not at rest. He's telling you that I'll open these gates for you and you'll see exactly how this works.
Yes.
Okay, any final thoughts, gentlemen, before we wrap up?
I think we're good. I think we're ready. We're ready. I mean, he set the stage, and he's letting us know, what to expect, which is this is gonna be a little bit contradictory, complicated, but bear with it and go through. He's preparing us properly.
Also, introductions of many masterpieces. Very often, the introduction is the best part of the book.
Best part of the book, yeah.
I'm not saying it is in this case. The book is incredible, as we're going to see. So I don't think it's in this case, but the introduction is certainly extremely enlightening. A lot of things. We already learned a lot just from the introduction.
Yes.
That's for sure.
Okay, so maybe we'll pause here. This was good. We know why he gave us this introduction now, because at first we were like wondering why we need to know about contradictions about.
No, so imagine learning this without the introduction. Like you'd be, first time you're tackling Mora and Nivouchim, and you don't have this introduction, and you're expecting something soft or light, you're gonna be lost. So I think that's what he did. He really set the stage properly, and he said, look out for the contradictions, look out for the parables, look out for things that I'm going to put in front of you. Because again, like I tried to picture this without the introduction, and it really would be a different ballgame.
Yeah.
But in all fairness, today was a little more dry than last week. Last week we had the intriguing parable of the ladder, right? And then the young gentleman consorting with the harlot. So at least you have something to talk about, right?
This was very technical. This week was very technical.
Yeah, exactly. So good stuff, guys.
Okay, Bezrat Hashem, we'll continue next time with chapter 1, and we'll look at the first contradiction, or contrary terms, I guess. Wishing everyone a great night. We'll see you next time.
Shabbat shalom.